The cold metal of the car hood dug into his chest as David Johnson was forced face down, handcuffed. His breath was shallow, ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. A knee pressed down on his back, a gun cold against his temple. "Who do you think you are?" a voice snarled, sharp with distrust. "Driving alone at night like this? What are you hiding?" But David wasn't hiding anything. His calm voice barely shook, though every instinct inside him screamed to fight. "I'm the mayor of this city," he said, his voice steady. "You're making a huge mistake." The two officers exchanged smirks, dismissing his words like they meant nothing. To them, he was just another black man they had pulled over in the dark of night. In the next few minutes, David would be treated like a criminal, just because of the color of his skin. He didn't deserve this. Not him, not any black man. But sometimes, justice isn't just about the law. It's about what's right. And tonight, David would learn that the hard way. Welcome to Acts of Kindness Stories, where we tell stories of resilience and truth, stories that change how we see the world. Stay with us to witness how one man's story turned into a battle for justice that could change everything. The moment David Johnson's car came to a stop, his heart already knew something was wrong. It was late, the streetlights were spaced too far apart, casting long dark shadows across the road. There were no other cars around. Just him and the silence, until the flashing red and blue lights pierced the calm, snapping him out of his thoughts. As a seasoned politician, David had been stopped by the police before. But this time it wasn't routine. Tonight there would be no cameras, no press, no people to stand up for him. It was just him, the mayor, and two police officers, ready to make a dangerous decision. Even though David had broken no laws, he felt his body tense as he pulled his car over. The officers approached the car slowly, each movement filled with suspicion. David took a deep breath, keeping his hands firmly on the steering wheel. It was a habit he'd learned from experience, a black man's instinct to ensure the police saw nothing but stillness and control. But as they came closer, something about the situation felt wrong. His heart beat a little faster. "Driver's license and registration," one of the officers demanded. David kept his voice steady. "I'll get them. They're in the glove compartment." The officer didn't respond, just watched him carefully. Every move David made felt like it was under a microscope. When he opened the compartment and retrieved his wallet, he couldn't help but notice the officer's eyes following his every movement. David knew the weight of this moment. He knew that one wrong move, one slip-up, and the consequences could be deadly. As he handed over the paperwork, the officer, Blake, flicked his eyes over the documents, his face shifting from disinterest to suspicion as he looked at the name, David Johnson. "Is this your car?" Blake sneered, his voice thick with doubt. David nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yes, it's mine. The papers say so." Blake didn't seem convinced. "A man like you driving a car like this," he muttered, passing the papers off to his partner. Miller, the younger officer, barely looked up, his hand resting just above his gun. The tension was palpable. Blake stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he crossed his arms. "What's a man like you doing driving out here this late at night?" His voice was laced with suspicion, a question not meant to understand but to provoke. David took a deep breath, willing himself not to snap. "I just left a charity event downtown. I'm heading home." Blake laughed, a mocking sound that grated on David's nerves. "A charity event? Sounds like a nice cover. What's a black man doing driving alone in the middle of the night?" David's heart clenched, his anger rising, but he knew better than to let it show. He had heard this kind of rhetoric before. The assumption, the judgment. But tonight, he couldn't help but feel the sting sharper than ever. "I'm not hiding anything," David said firmly, his voice steady despite the building tension. "I'm just going home." But Blake wasn't finished. The questions continued, each one more antagonistic than the last. His words dripped with condescension, treating David not as a person but as a suspect, simply because of the color of his skin. David kept his composure, but his thoughts raced. How many times had he spoken out against this very thing? How many times had he preached about equal rights, about justice, about fairness? Yet here he was, the mayor, humiliated, treated like a criminal. And then, without warning, Blake reached in and yanked him from the car. His grip like steel on David's arm. The motion was so sudden, so rough, that David barely had time to react before he was shoved against the hood of the car. His face pressed into the cold metal. David froze, feeling his breath catch in his throat. This was it. He had seen this happen too many times. Black men just like him forced to the ground, their lives hanging by a thread. He knew the history. He knew how quickly things could escalate. Face down, Blake barked. David obeyed, keeping his hands raised. His mind raced. He was the mayor. This wasn't right. This couldn't be happening. But none of that mattered. He wasn't the mayor right now. He was just a black man, at the mercy of two men who had already decided he was guilty. The rough search began. Blake grabbed at his pockets, his hands invasive, disrespectful. Every move felt like a punishment. Every touch felt like a reminder of just how far he had fallen, from the mayor of a city to a suspect with no rights. "Stop!" David demanded, his voice full of authority. "I'm the mayor. You need to stop." But the officers didn't listen. Instead they laughed, mocked him. "Mayor," Blake scoffed. "You must be joking." David's heart sank as the weight of his helplessness pressed down on him. They were humiliating him. They didn't care who he was. To them, he was just another black man. And that was enough to make him a target. The handcuffs clicked shut, tightening painfully around his wrists. The officers' laughter filled the night air, a cruel mockery of the power they wielded over him. David clenched his jaw, fighting back the sting of shame. But then a voice rang out from the darkness. "What the hell are you doing?" A man across the street stood with his phone raised, recording the whole scene. "I'm live streaming this. People need to see this." Blake and Miller froze, their eyes flicking to the camera. David knew that this might be the one thing that could save him, evidence. Proof that the officers had gone too far. "Get out of here," Blake shouted, but the man didn't move. He just kept filming, his voice steady, refusing to back down. The officers' discomfort was palpable. Their confidence was slipping, replaced by a flicker of fear. They knew the consequences now. This wasn't just a random stop anymore. This was an incident that could change everything. As David lay there, handcuffed and humiliated, he could hear the faint sound of a police siren in the distance, growing louder. His mind raced. Who was coming? What was going to happen? Minutes later, a patrol car arrived, its lights flashing as it skidded to a halt. The sheriff, Robert Hayes, jumped out of the car and immediately saw what was going on. His face turned pale as he took in the sight of David kneeling on the ground, surrounded by the two officers. "What the hell is this?" Sheriff Hayes shouted, stepping forward. He turned to the two officers, his voice filled with disbelief. "You arrested the mayor." Blake and Miller exchanged looks of panic. They hadn't realized who they had pulled over, who they had humiliated. The truth hit them like a wave. They had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward, his anger boiling over as he ordered the officers to uncuff David. The sound of the handcuffs dropping to the ground echoed through the street, a sharp reminder of just how far this had gone. Blake and Miller knelt before David, their arrogance gone. "Please, Mr. Mayor," Miller said, his voice trembling. "We didn't know. We were just following procedure." David stood silently, brushing the dirt from his clothes. The anger inside him was palpable, but so was the exhaustion. He knew that if he wasn't the mayor, if he was just another black man in this situation, things could have ended differently. Far differently. He didn't say a word as he walked past the two officers still kneeling, their faces filled with regret. But his eyes said everything. This was not just a mistake. It was a symptom of a much larger issue, a system that had been broken for far too long. And as he left the scene, David knew one thing for sure. This wouldn't be the end. The system had to change. It was time for justice, for accountability, for change that could prevent another black man from facing the same humiliation, the same danger. The fight was far from over. The next day, David stood before a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing as the world watched. He took a deep breath, his hands steady but his heart still raw from the night before. The weight of the situation hung heavily on him, but his voice rang clear and strong as he stepped up to the podium. "I am lucky," he began, his gaze firm, "because I am the mayor. But how many others aren't so lucky? How many people are stopped, humiliated, even killed, just because of the color of their skin? How many stories are buried because no one speaks out, because no one records the truth?" The room fell silent. David's words cut through the air, not just as a call for justice, but as a demand for change, a message to everyone who had ever been ignored or silenced. His fight wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever faced this kind of injustice, who had ever been treated as less than human simply because of their skin color. He looked at the sea of faces, each one waiting for his next words. "This isn't just about one man's experience," he continued. "This is about a system that has been broken for far too long. And I promise you this, I will not stop until we have a more equitable system, where no one has to fear for their lives just because of the color of their skin." The applause was thunderous. But David knew that the fight had only just begun. The road to justice was long, and there would be many more battles ahead. But this moment, it was a start. And in that moment, the world had to listen. Acts of Kindness Stories wants to make sure that this story, and others like it, aren't forgotten. If this story moved you, if it made you think about what needs to change, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, leave a comment and let us know what you think. Together we can make a difference. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to Acts of Kindness Stories. We're on a mission to bring you more stories that matter, more stories that make an impact. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers and be part of the change. We can't change the world alone, but together we can make it a little more just. Thank you for watching.